This is Pritika, and you're listening to Millennials Boleh, the show which is all about millennials. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Millennials Boleh. To start the new year with a bang, and we're talking all about films and stories. Now, who better to talk about films than Sidney Chan? Sidney is a millennial filmmaker, writer, and editor. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sidney.
Hi. I find it weird when people call me like a filmmaker, writer, all that. It's like it's so. Sometimes you don't feel like you're what people describe you as.
Right.
Yeah. But I think I just occasionally do films now. Not so as often as before. Right now, I'm more of a editor rather than anything else. Yeah, it's at least a bit more stable lah.
Right.
In terms of finding work and all that. Yeah.
Nice. And I
Yeah.
I guess that kind of takes us to the first thing that I guess we all want to know about you, which is how did you start your journey in filmmaking? What inspired you to go into that when you did, and what's the journey been like for you as that editor, filmmaker, and director?
I think the journey is a bit strange. Like if you want to talk about my career, it's a bit complicated lah. But like I started wanting to make films because of my exposure to horror movies back in the early 2000s. Back when there was a trend of Japanese horror or Asian horror, and the disappointment I had with Pontianak Harum Sundar Malam drove me to feel like, hey, why don't we make our own films? And I think at the same time, I was playing like video games at the time, like Fatal Frame and Silent Hill and everything that sort of made me a bit more like brave or conquering fear and whatnot. And then that's when like the lure of being able to make your own thing and putting it out there is what kickstarted the whole process of wanting to become that. So I used to write like stories, a bit of fan fiction and whatnot. Uh, Started with fan fiction, all the way back then for Sonic the Hedgehog. It's so random, right? And a lot of other things. So it's just the whole of wanting to create something, right? And also maybe emotionally manipulate the audience. Then I think like at the time also I did my degree in psychology, and then back then in psychology like there wasn't really much like I started a film club in psychology, and we also had a module for psychology of film made by Dr. Goh Chi Leong. He created a class where every week we would watch a film and then write a report on it using like scientifically analyzing the film with psychology concepts and how it affects the real world, how it reflects real world society, right? And then one of the assignments was to make our own film. So those are the kinds of things that I was very drawn to. And like and I think at the time, that's when I started picking up my own camera. I got my own camera. I used to like to film, like document stuff and take photos and whatnot. So from there, because of what I've done back then in making a film club and producing videos in college, people got to know what I do, and I was then recommended to join Durian FM, which is a political online radio station, and that's when I started dipping my toes into a bit of journalism, a bit of political propaganda, and then so happens that someone else in that same psychology of film class was a very close friend of Joseph Germani, a YouTuber who was very popular at the time. And he was also looking for a video guy. So I would then slowly transition to, after the general elections, I slowly transitioned to joining him. And that's my first exposure into the YouTube world came about. First main exposure to mainstream YouTube. And then I was started just shooting videos, editing video sketches. And then eventually after I left Joseph Shimani, I joined Grim Film, which is another YouTube channel, which I think you probably saw Gift of Gab on there.
Yes, yes.
The main actor is Jared Lee, so he brought me in, and we started telling a lot of short stories. And I think that was a time where we discovered, like, I had experienced a lot of like feedback, instant feedback for our films. Like I used to make a lot of short stories back in college all the way until now. So it's like, a natural process of just telling stories for YouTube. And it's a very different kind of a feeling when you make stories that are like very much uh, for an instant audience, all the way 2017 when I think as I stayed in the industry, I grew a bit more disillusioned, or there's a lot of personal issues I had at the time. Part of it also was like dealing with depression, and the at the time hadn't discovered that that I had ADHD, or you know and generally I always suspected that I had a little bit of autism, or maybe Asperger's or whatnot, because of how I was as a person. But I think everything in combination was led me to eventually having to break out of where I was. And then that's when I joined another production house, Kino Visuals, and then I joined agency, and then I joined Book Access, like and then now I'm back to today. I'm just freelancing. I don't know. It's very difficult to pinpoint the trajectory of where I went, because I told you it's gonna be a mess if you talk about a career, and it's also gonna be a mess when I tangent out into what else I'm doing. But it is really just a series of different things happening over the years. If you ask me specific questions, I probably would answer. But yeah, I think at the same time, I wanted to mention also that while I was in my journey to find myself, I think that's like 3 years ago, I also in those circles met a few different good friends
Mm,
who are now people that I am very comfortable working with, and together we've made more short films also, more personal short films for myself, for ourselves, rather than doing movies for clients to earn a living.
mm,
One of those short films was Tinapa. This is not a petrol ad. I think that was I think that was, if you want to talk about millennial filmmaking, that was the most millennial thing I can ever think of my attempt at telling a story, because it was a very self-aware film that tried to have a critique against some of the things that we take for granted. Later on, uh, I joined a film production back during COVID. It's called Mentega Terbang. I went in as a DP and editor. So I think we're still, I think, I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but yeah, it's a feature film, like an hour, 47 minutes, that we went on to Yogyakarta. So it's a very underground film also, where it talks about religion,
mm,
especially in the perspective of a young Muslim girl trying to come to terms with her mother's mortality. At the
mm,
same time, like, she wants to be with her mother uh, in the afterlife, so she's researching other afterlives to find the correct one. So
mm.
it's that kind of narrative. Lah.
Yeah. And you spoke about a lot of different themes when you talked about your journey. One of the things was sort of about like how you can connect to millennials with your films and how you made that film that you talked about. So when you look back at your sort of I guess in all the films that you've made, how do you think those kinds of films how were they inspired by the fact that you were a millennial? Do you think that that had something to do with, the creative element of your films? Would you say
Okay,
that being a millennial affected that, and how do
yeah.
you think, yeah.
Okay, so if you want to see me, okay, I think being a millennial is okay. I think it definitely did. I think the fact that self-identifying as a millennial sort of added a bit of sort of motivated the different decisions I made during the filmmaking process. I think because we are, as millennials, right, we are in between the classics and Gen Z. And I don't think, many of us, I don't think we can ever compare ourselves to the classics. We always look up, we romanticize the great people, great films from the past, assuming that they have never been in our age before, we
Yeah.
assume that they are the best, So at the same time, because we are a bit more self-aware, we're a bit more casual, we had time to think and create philosophies in our heads about why is it like that? Why is that like that? So I think we are a generation that's a little bit more self-aware, slightly more self-aware than usual. Not as self-aware as Gen Z, but that's the start of it. And I think at the same time, like most of the films I did, part of it is just me wanting to just tell that story, not thinking about the whole millennial thing or how would it touch the audience. But part of it also was, how do I make sure that the audience will feel something? So it's a mix of different. Every time I make a film, it's a different agenda. Like sometimes I just want to make a film because I would like to emulate films that I like. Like one of my most personal favorite films was called I Feel Like. It's a Cantonese film. It's called Be Mine Would You. It was also on Grim Film. And it was supposed to be a Cantonese comedy, Chinese comedy that emulated uh, the kinds of funny dramas and films I watched growing up as a kid. So it's a romantic comedy about an overweight guy uh, trying to who fell in love with a girl with a girl who, spoilers, also has a condition that is opposite of what he has, which is bulimia, and also like the like every trope that you had seen in those classic dramas are all in here. But also the conscious decisions to do things differently was also there. I think if you want to talk about the millennial mindset, it's about how do I tell this story while injecting some kind of educational stuff or commentary or agenda, like, and or how do I make it like not so typical? So one of the things would be, okay, having the main character be overweight, but at the same time, let's make him accept himself. Let's not make him like, oh, lose weight. Aside from the fact that it's impossible to do in a short film for this low budget, but um, you would want him to be comfortable with himself. At the same time, you have the opposite uh, effect where the girl herself is suffering from body image issues, which is ironic. And then also having the conscious decision to make sure that um, they don't end up together, they just end up as friends. Why? Because you don't always need to have, guy gets the girl and all that. It's so annoying because it's so toxic in a sense where why do you always have to associate guy and girl? You think, what lock must enter key every time, man? Every lock must enter key, man. Or every key must enter lock, right? So it's like it's so like it's like I just wanted to have that. To
Yeah.
have a romantic comedy subplot, but then you subvert it. I
Mm.
think that's the word. I think that's the key word is subversion, right?
Mm.
So I think that like, but at the same time, the challenge is that when I try to have an agenda, sometimes it just gets in the way of storytelling as well. Like it's 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 all about like when the message takes more prominence than the story, it sort of like muddles it up, sort of makes it
Mm.
more difficult to tell a story. And I think it was, I think like the reason why it was my most favorite short film, Be Mine Would You, is because it just was pure fun. The How that film came about was because I wanted to do a, it's because I imagined a scene of a guy. I imagined a scene where a guy was telling his friend, "How do you know if you really love someone?" And the secret to that is to look at the girl's photo, put it away, and then look at the photo again. And then if you still are attracted to this girl, it means you really like this person. So that was the first scene that I imagined, like to be in a film. I want to make a film where
Yeah.
I can have this scene.
Yeah.
So then the whole film was built around it.
It was built around it.
So one elaborate, long, emotional story
Yeah.
was built around that one scene, and it became its own thing.
Right.
So it was just something stupid, and all the messages and the development of the themes, the agendas came later.
Right.
Yeah, and also because I wanted to cast my friends, to be in a film. Hey, would you like to be in my film? I
Yeah.
want to see you on my film. I want to make you famous. I think it was just a pure, stupid, let's make something together.
Yeah.
Um,
And you spoke about like how you sort of make the films based on an idea and then you sort of build it based on that. I guess like if we go back a little bit to The Gift of Gab, right? So
yeah.
you wrote that film as
Oh,
well.
yeah, yeah,
And so how did you sort of come up with the idea there? Because it's quite interesting. Like when I watched it, what I felt, the theme that I got from it was that physical expression sometimes is much easier. Well, it's much easier, and it should be used versus like verbal expression. Sometimes you can't find the right words to say something,
oh, yeah.
and it ends up being that, something that we show is what connects to the person. So something like that, which is actually a very strong message in a film. How did you get the idea to that, and that
Oh,
film was
oh.
sort of made from it?
Okay, so that film was actually, so the backstory, that film was made to to join a competition that had tremendous pressure on me, which is a Berjaya Youth Short Film Competition. And that was my last year of joining because the age cutoff was 25. It's the most pressured thing ever. So I wrote that story few years before as a top of line idea because so I wrote that story many years back, I think 2014, 2013, and it was more of a personal story, personal thought process where I was always constantly the mediator between arguing parties. Even way back in college, there were always people around me that were arguing and fighting, and um, and I think I always tried to talk to both parties and reason out. I always feel that sometimes it's just a misunderstanding. Maybe the way person didn't express properly. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they lack the certain keywords or vocabulary to say things. So they substitute words with something more crude. Or maybe the other person doesn't understand those words that the other guy is saying. So if only we could like mentally, what do you call that? Have this hive mind where everybody could just like absorb their thoughts, it would be easier. But no, we can't do that. So I was always known as the guy that tried to make peace between people, no matter what it was the case. And sometimes you just fail. You can't do anything about it because um, sometimes it's not. Sometimes words are not enough, and sometimes the other person can't speak also. Like even in my own situation now, in my own marriage, it's also a different journey altogether. But uh, it was just a thought where I wanted to make a what if we made a very simple story that's very much like Pixar. Uh, I think there was a parody of Pixar movie trailers starring it's called Sometimes Why, the letter Y, and it's like told in a very trailer story. So it's almost like telling a narrative style English story, and how do you create a world that's very much based around that, where the character is a mediator, but in a very exaggerated way. I think part also was that of that film was inspired by this Italian film called The Occupation, or yeah, it's called The Occupation, where either French or Italian, where it's a bunch of people doing mundane jobs such as being a coat hanger, or being a door, or being a carpet, or being an elevator. A physical person doing their job as an object. So so that was the idea of having an exaggerated version of that role as a mediator. And then I think I had a challenge of how do I tell this story in only 5 minutes. I think at the same time, Grand Budapest Hotel by Wes Anderson came out, and it's like, oh yes, now I can. Now I know how to tell my story in an interesting way, like having the camera be fixed in a symmetrical pattern and just telling it in an interesting way. Yeah, but I think that film itself, part of it was just a personal journey lah, where I wanted to just let people know that sometimes I wouldn't say to let people know. Actually, it's a more selfish thing. It's more like it's just an expression of me thinking out loud, where sometimes you can't tell. You can't tell someone. Sometimes you got
Mm,
to show someone. Yeah.
yeah. And I guess you spoke about the Grand Budapest there, and sort of, I'm a huge fan of Wes Anderson and his style
Yeah.
of filmmaking. So would you say that you have like a specific style of filmmaking, or is it something that you sort of change and you adapt to in every film that you make?
Oh, so that was the context of the question. Okay. I adapt to it actually. I have no specific style. Everything I do is based on what I think looks nice, what I think looks cool, based on the films I watched. And sometimes it's also like watching films and realizing, I actually can get away with it if I shot it like that.
Right.
And I think Grand Budapest Hotel turned my storytelling for that particular film into like you can't carry an entire film just on a concept. So you have to
Mm,
compensate with, interesting visual styles. And also because we don't have much props or much decoration, at least the symmetrical aspect of it makes it a bit more interesting. And then
right.
maybe, yeah, so it's I don't have a particular style. It's more based on the situation and based on my mood.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think Wes Anderson's style sort of made it more convenient, I guess, to sometimes tell a non-story,
Yeah.
to tell a movie, to do something that probably doesn't have a story, but as long as it looks visually interesting to compensate.
Mm,
Sometimes I see it as a crutch, you know, but at the same time, it's like I just like it at the same time. So yeah, it just depends on the situation.
right.
I would say that my style back then also from until now used to be a bit more normal. Like early days, I would just hold the camera in my hand, and then like I think back then when DSLRs first came about, there was this whole like lenses and like you could blur the background and all that. So I think YouTubers like Wongfu Productions back then used to film like that. So you'd have the focus out effects. So it's just something that happens by accident lah, and something that I happen to like. Yeah. But over time, I think as I start to get exposed more, I've learned different techniques. But again, learning how the technique is just one thing. I think at the end of the day, it's just convenience or feasibility.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And because when you make films, like you talked about, like zooming in and looking at different effects of how you can engage the audience. Some of the decisions that you make, let's say as a director, or even a cinematographer, what is it that you want the audience to get from it? I guess it depends on the situation, but if there's something that you want the audience to get from your style of filming, what would it be, would you say?
What do I want them to focus on? You mean on the
Yes.
frame? I think if I were to, okay, I'm not very a learned person when it comes to filmmaking techniques. So again, everything I do is based on feeling or how my mood during the day or how I feel aesthetically it looks in the film. And I think it's more like a sense of maybe sometimes depending on the film, it's dreaminess or emotion. I like doing a lot of intense close-ups where you see the person's emotions where they stare off into the distance. I think a friend of mine used to tell me that I tend to do this Wong Kar-wai technique accidentally, where I had one film where my character is like talking to the person, then he looks away, then looks off to the distance, then back to the person. He calls it the tree perspective. I don't know, I don't know what is it called, but the character basically focused on three different things and then back to the camera, back to the character. So I I I I I basically like again like to focus more on like visually focus more on the characters' faces because that's what draws me in sometimes. Not so much on objects and whatnot. Yeah, and I would also do a lot of cutaways sometimes as a way to cheat lah. Because like I didn't get a continuous shot of this scene, so I got to cut away so I can cut the dialogue shot and come back.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Again, it's like, and then sometimes when I cut away, right, it's like,
Yeah.
what do I cut away to that's relevant?
Right. But I mean, you do it well, don't you? Because I mean, that's something that I wouldn't have known unless I've spoken to you about it. So I mean, whatever decisions that you do make in your films, it works, and
it's
and
it's
it's
actually
interesting to watch it,
it's
I guess.
it's
Yeah.
actually it's sometimes it's just accidental or out of
Right.
convenience or like,
Yeah.
it works. Then you put it
Yes.
together.
Yes.
I do that even in my editing also.
Yeah.
It's just yeah.
Yeah, because when we watch films, I'm not a filmmaker. I love photography, but what I think about when I watch films, and yours as well, is like I'm always thinking, oh, I wonder what the director wants us to get from this scene. What was the decision that went into
Ah,
this small scene, something like that. Um,
like what example did you bring up so I can at least
I think like I'm just thinking specifically about the Gift of Gab right now, but like like when he gets to the point where he's frustrated with the daughter because
ah
she doesn't express in that way, so he sort of like shouts at her, but then it's not you hear a little bit of his voice, but not in full volume, because I mean the style of the Gift of Gap is very
mostly
like
silent. Yeah,
yeah, it's mostly silent. So I guess in that scene I'm thinking,
it's
what
like
is
a
it that's the message here, that there's a
okay
slight voice, but not
okay.
in full volume,
If
something
if
like that.
I were to if I were to bullshit my way, I would say that, oh, that represents a break in the film where throughout the film you always hear music and the narrator's voice, but because he's under frustration, that's the first time you hear his actual voice, where he breaks out of character and stop being a mediator. That's when you hear the reality of the coldness around him. So that's how I
Right.
can push it my
Okay.
way, right? But I think at the time it was like, how do I show his frustration now?
Yeah.
And like I don't think maybe I think it was just at the time because we were under pressure for time, right? And like how do I show him frustrated? maybe just have Jared scream at him. I think Jared just did his own thing and screamed, and I just kept it in the cut. Cause like, okay lah, it's still it's still not talking. He's still not like directly talking. We don't hear his voice, but it's like he's still considered like a background noise when he talks, right? Not
Mm.
actual words.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I think also the difficulty was how do you tell a story where it's wordless, only narrated by the narrator, but you need to have the characters speak. That's why you have the scene where he speaks to the little boy, and
Mm.
you hear a bit of his voice in the background, and the narrator is the one that talks over. But for the scene where he screams at the girl and all that, I don't think it would have been appropriate for the narrator to also say what he says.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I think also I didn't have any line to give him that would be suitable. So it was just Jared's acting that I put in. But when I put it together, and now that you tell me about it, it's like, huh, looks like thematically it works.
Yes. Yes.
That's my
Yeah.
official story from now on. Now it breaks character, it breaks the scene, the mise en scène, you know.
Right, right. And I guess on the other side, what I've learned is that sometimes things are accidental in films and
Yeah,
it works. And I guess yeah, it's interesting from like another because you're the input coming in from the creator side, and then we are the audience. We respond to
yeah,
your creative side, right? So yeah, it's
yeah,
interesting that we sort of make a link, but
yeah,
the story is different from what we sometimes think,
yeah.
I guess, which is quite
You
interesting.
see, I think it's more like things take on a life of their own, and things just come naturally. And I think it's also a human need to find that connection in everything. That's why you got terminology like pareidoia, where you see faces in things that don't have anything.
Mm,
Pareidoia, I think, yeah, pareidoia. So it's just that constant need to find meaning, and I think that's the crux of everything.
yeah.
So meaning somehow comes naturally, and 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 when you try to make a film that has meaning, sometimes you don't have to try too hard also. I think when I was watching on some film analysis stuff, you sort of wonder like, because every film analysis essay, most of it is just from the writer's own interpretation of some other person's work. But it starts to feel weird when you see other people making analysis of your own work. You feel like, wow, someone is taking my stupid project seriously, or my half-ass work previously. But
Mm,
it's like sometimes it's like, again, it takes on a life of its own,
yeah.
without you controlling it.
Yeah, it's a lot more organic
It's organic.
than I guess yeah, not everything is planned, I guess, which is
Yeah,
quite interesting.
and I
Yeah.
think it hurts things when you watch too many of these essays and then you try to plan for it, and then it hurts the process.
Mm,
So I think it's just what I'm thinking of in hindsight lah.
yeah.
Because I started focusing more on how to tell these stories with proper planning, and it just made it feel even more artificial.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, like, which is more important, the story or the agenda or the technique? So that's
Yeah.
why I don't really do films that much anymore, not as often. Part of it is due to me being tired after all these years. Part of it is also due to maybe me taking on medication, which is antidepressants, where it sort of dulls my negative thoughts, but at the same time dulls my maybe it sort of dulled my writing in a way. I
Right.
go more
Interesting.
straight. I go straight to the point more rather than being
Yeah.
romantic or poetic about it. So
Yeah.
I
But
am.
I guess you could see it as, that's you changing your style of like your creative process in a sense, right? It could I guess lead to like different projects
Yeah,
in the future as well, where where that element feeds into a different theme
yeah,
of films. Yeah.
yeah. It's I think it's just again, as you say, like it adapts. My style changed over the years, And I think I still want to tell the same stories again. I still want to re-explore things I didn't explore. It's just that now life has changed lah for me. And I think the key thing is that I am never going to let that part go.
Mm.
I'm never going to say never. And now I'm slowly tapering. I'm slowly like quitting my antidepressants because it's causing me to gain weight also. And now I find myself writing more long form essays on Facebook these days. So and making more puns and whatnot. So it's a very it's just again, as I'm talking to you, I'm also reflecting in the fact that yeah, I used to do a lot of interesting stuff back in the day, and I think now I am still doing interesting stuff. It's just that it's not translating into new short films or new stories.
Mm.
I think the biggest thing I've ever done so far was just 2 years ago for for my for the feature film Merdeka Terbang, and
Mm.
also a few short film competitions I joined. And now that my son is born, I'm under pressure to think, what do I film with my son before he grows older? Again, I think if I were to break down way back when until now, it's like I used to tell stories based on people I see. Like
Mm.
I would look in college, right? I would look at someone and then I imagine a story around that person based on what trope I see. If
Mm.
a person looks tragic, I will think of a tragic story. Like, hey, you look tragic, want to be my film? So
Right.
yeah, so it's just again how the whole again like I said about Be Mine Would You about the whole Tafige story. It was also the same thing where I looked at my friend who was a big size, and then I looked at another girl, and I imagined, I just imagine him chasing after that girl.
Right.
So that's when the thing came about. So it's a matter of looking at a story based on a person you see. It's very judgy. It's very like it maybe it's terrible. It's almost like you're undressing the person with your eyes. But it's like sometimes it's just a matter of using your own assumptions and biases to craft something. And
Yeah.
it's I think that's something that I'm trying to find again
Yeah.
because nowadays I don't have any emotional connection to most of the people I see, but um back then it was easier because I had emotional connection in a way that I want to see them in a film. And again, priorities changed, and now it's all about story or all about sellability and marketing. But
Mm.
but now that I'm freelancing, I have a bit more time to think. It's starting to slowly come back.
Yeah. And I guess we, like for the listeners, I would say that, we definitely look forward to what you come up with next, because I think your ideas are always very unique. And it's interesting. It will be interesting to see what you come up with now, sort of like I know we're kind of in the phase where we're coming out of the pandemic a little bit.
Yeah,
So, I guess what you come up with now will be quite interesting as well to watch.
iPad. I mean, I've done pandemic related stuff before, so featuring my wife, and I think it was for a competition. It's called Don't Go by Sidney
Hmm.
Chan.
Yeah, seen that, yeah.
You've seen that already?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's good.
Oh, thanks. That film also was if that film also, yeah, that one was me trying very hard to force an agenda because the agenda was how do you tell a pandemic story without saying it's a pandemic. And
Mm.
and then at the time I was watching Annihilation and a lot of Annihilation and like those post-apocalyptic kind of stories.
Yeah.
Like, how do you tell then? And I think again one of the scenes that came to my mind was that scene of the talking bear in Annihilation. Not really a talking bear, but a undead bear that mimics the voices of people it's killed. So
Mm.
it calls out to you. So in a way, the pandemic is the COVID itself is sort of like the loved one, the need to go out, to reach out to someone, to find connection from isolation. You can't go out. You have to, but you're not allowed to go out, but you need a connection. But if you go out, you get infected and you become one of them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So so that was the idea of like, having the need to connect back with your loved ones, be
Mm,
the reason for your doom.
yeah,
So
yeah.
so so I think at the time it was just me and my camera and my wife and the dog and my in-laws. So I think again, all of these things is just by accident because it's necessary. I had no other resource.
Yeah.
And if you look back, and I look back at all the films I made, a lot of it was also based on doing a lot with what little you have.
Mm,
And things are different when you have a lot or when you have things, but you're not certain how far you can go with it. I think if you were to watch modern movies also where maybe Peter Jackson or whatnot, if you look at his older films and now, like it's a difference between having no budget to having a lot of budget. And then what happens during the Hobbit trilogy where he's almost unlimited budget?
yeah.
It's a different mindset when you're not challenged
Right.
or all that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I wouldn't say green
Nice.
screen is not a challenge, but yeah,
Nice. Okay. Yeah, and I think that that is an important lesson as well, like when you have resources in abundance, um, but I guess another side is, does that lead to positive things, or is it that, in those challenges you create, or because you have a lack of resource, you're pushed to create something that's very
yeah.
raw and organic. Yeah.
It's a time capsule also lah, because at the time you didn't have resources. That was your mindset at the time, and every film is a time capsule. But I think at the time resources were, I mean, the lack of resources isn't the only thing that drives you lah. The fact that there's a competition going on with a short deadline the next day also drove
Yeah.
me lah.
Definitely. Yeah,
And if
definitely.
you have,
I think with, even if you're a student listening, like, when you have assignments, like, yeah, I mean, it's getting, obviously it's writing about the topic, but it's the deadline, isn't it, that gets you
yeah, I would
going.
say that the Gift of Gap won first runner up, and it was a project that was done like a few days before the deadline.
Right. It doesn't look like it. Doesn't look like it at all. So
Like a
well
few,
done to you and your
maybe a
team. Yeah.
week. Thanks. But
Yeah.
a lot of the films we did is short before. It's like very, very tight deadline. And I think like even a film, there are like a few films I've done, collaborate with other people. There was just one day before the deadline that
Right.
won. I have a friend. I think if you maybe you can interview her next. Her name is Ibtisam Ben Nasib. She is the winner for HBO's short film competition back before the pandemic.
Okay.
She also shot it's called Ali. Ibtisam, IBTISEM. I still collaborate with her a lot, but she shot that film a day like maybe 1 or 2 days before the submission.
Oh,
She submitted it very late at night, few
right.
1 hour or few minutes before the submission, and she won. So
Right.
so it's not a very good. I don't know what are you teaching again.
I teach children. I teach a range of different subjects, but yeah, I'm a teacher, primary children.
It's the whole fact that it's last minute that drives the pressure, and
Yes.
maybe it's an ADHD thing also. I don't know. It just gets you to, I think the cortisol that you're feeling sort of drives you. But when
Yeah.
you're too long, too
Yeah.
much freedom, like you sort of don't get it. It's the
Yeah.
same as maybe the same as with budget also.
Yeah.
And back then, when we were starved for cinematic freedom, right? DSLRs were our creative expression because back then it was all very much locked off to the professional filmmakers. But
Yeah.
DSLRs are our gateway into it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I think that's the resource that we held on to. And I could very say clearly when I started handling, I used to look forward to a camera that was very high end back then called the Canon 5D Mark II. It was
Mm.
marketed as the most cinematic camera. Then I only had an entry level camera and I
Yeah.
made a lot of stuff with it. When I joined a company, there are two of these cameras. I hated them. They were cumbersome. They were cumbersome and like I didn't get what I wanted. So again, it's like you always lust after something, but once you have it, you feel like, oh lah, no need already. You
Yeah.
don't feel motivated. So again, you always need to latch on to something to always have that insatiable drive.
Yeah.
So I learned, I think for me, I'm learning how to artificially create a drive for myself so that I work towards it, but learn how to, not see the destination.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes. Um, yeah, it's been really interesting talking to you about like
yeah.
filmmaking and all the different things that you've talked about. So just one question that I usually ask my guests at the end of the show, and it is, what is one myth about millennials that you disagree with? So what would your response be to that?
I do not know much of the myths. I think like the whole lazy millennial and everything and all that. I would say I wouldn't disagree with many of it. Some of it is true. I would also self-reflect and say that I am a millennial that has been born with a silver spoon at one point. So I was very sheltered and basically raised like I don't think I was a special needs kid, but I was raised like one because of how sheltered I was, and it reflected in my behavior. But I would say that millennials are resourceful. We know we know what we want. But there was one myth that I would want to say is something that millennials always tell each other lah. Um, every millennial is different, and there are definitely a lot of toxic millennials out there who
Mm,
are who are exactly what the boomers think we are. There are also the kind of millennials that are opposite of what we like to pat ourselves on the back with. I have known millennials to be bigoted, to
mm,
be horrible people. I wouldn't say 100% horrible. They're still like okay, but they are not perfect.
mm.
Yeah, and everything. And I think we are at a time where because social media is more out there, you sort of see the different strata of people with different opinions, and you realize that it's not so much a generational thing. Part of it is, but it's just what you are exposed to, lah. I think you wanted to ask about what can the film industry do and what is the kinds of films I will be making in the future. I think I
Yeah,
just named.
if you would love to talk about that, yes, great.
Okay, so I wanted to because I saw this question, I thought I wanted to answer this. But I think the if you want to talk about the context of recent events,
Yeah.
maybe not me, but I want to see stories where people talk about toxic patriotism. And I'm not talking on the left wing, right wing thing, but it's the mindset of hero worship. Our leaders can do no wrong. If I were to say something that criticizes your leader, you will start turning around and saying, why are you only criticizing that tunnel vision? Why are you only criticizing that person? And it's like you can't have a balanced opinion. You have 100% support. I went to a PKR rally. There was an old lady that wanted to sit down on the wet grass, but she had to squat instead. There was a PKR flag. I told her, why don't you lie down on the flag? A dude next to her said, no, don't disrespect the flag. And it's like, what is this nonsense? Again, like uh, aside from toxic criticism, it segues back into censorship, lah, which is maybe change the cultural mindset.
Yeah.
So I'm echoing a lot of other filmmakers who've interviewed, which is film education is lacking here.
Yeah.
Not education, film culture.
Mm,
And and I think if you want to improve this, right, this is something that I spoke to, or something that Kamil Othman mentioned during the few times I met him. He mentioned about how Korea has an export culture, and you see K-pop everywhere nowadays because I think one of the things they tried to do was make sure that they beat Japan. That's why you no longer see so much of J-pop. You see K-pop now,
right.
and
Okay.
and and there are a lot of things. a lot of Malaysian stories that are rich and strong and relatable, even though it's a Nusantara thing. And you can export these things out. You can bring this out to the international circuit.
Well, thank you so much, Sydney. I think you've talked a lot about films and the process that goes behind films, and we've also talked a lot about how we can support our Malaysian films as Malaysians in a better way. And yeah, it's been really interesting talking to you. Thank you so much for
Sorry,
coming today
yeah.
and sharing all your
Sorry
experience.
for going off tangent everywhere. I'm just
No,
not.
no worries at all. I think there's so many interesting themes that came out of the conversation today. So yeah, thank you.